Hello world, I am Curtis Simpson, and this is the Jectives flip-through book review of The Anatomy of Type by Stephen Coles. I am going to flip through every single page in this book, but before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and give you a recommendation for who I think this book is for, who maybe it's not for. That way you can decide if you want to spend the next chunk of time with me watching this book review or whether maybe another book would be better suited for you. So this book is not for the beginner. This is not for the person who is learning about typography for the very, very first time. A better book for that might be something like Ellen Lupton's Thinking with Type. I have 2 videos on that. Go check that out if you're brand new to typography. If you're not brand new to typography, if you know a little bit about typography, maybe you're a graphic designer, maybe you're a web designer, this is a great book for learning more about the anatomy of type, obviously. So if you read this, you will be able to understand more than just the anatomy chart that we typically see in every single typography book. We're all very familiar with something like this. You probably saw this in your Type 101 class, and you were expected to memorize this and report on it for a test probably. You need to label these different things. If you want to move beyond that and you want to be able to recognize all the different details within a typeface, this is a great place to start. Is it going to make you magically able to identify every single typeface that you come across? No. But what it will do is it will teach you all of the little details and all of the attributes and anatomy that you look for in a typeface to be able to, 1, identify it if that's what you're trying to do, but 2, and this moves on to the next person that I think this would be good for, and that is someone who is an aspiring type designer. If you've ever thought about maybe I'll get into type design, maybe you're already a type designer, this book will point out 100 of the world's greatest typefaces, as you can see right here, 100 of the world's greatest typefaces, and it's going to give you a lot of details on them, and it's going to give you a lot of insight into what went into creating these and why all the little details work together. If those little details are interesting to you, if it's interesting to you that a typeface has a round dot instead of a square dot, if it's interesting to you that there's an angled terminal on the top of this T, those are the types of things that you're going to need to decide to do when you design a typeface. So if you want to design typefaces, these types of details are things that you're going to need to be able to recognize and decide if you're going to do them or not. And then the last person that I think that this would be a great book for is anyone who is interested in what I call the seeds. And the seeds are just little ideas that you come across in here. Maybe we flip to this page right here. We see ITC Bodoni, and we see Giambattista Bodoni. And then you think, I don't know anything about this guy. Bodoni is one of the most famous typefaces in the world, designed in 1790. I don't know anything about him. Let me go look stuff up. You will constantly be doing that with this book. This book took me several weeks to read, not because it's a difficult book to read. You can see that every page on here is the exact same structure. It's not a difficult book to read. It's very simple in its structure and its presentation. But if you choose to go dig down these rabbit holes, dive down these rabbit holes, pull on these threads, water these seeds, whatever metaphor you want to use, and you want to look up, hey, why is there so much Dutch typography? Why are there so many type designers in the Netherlands? Why is there so much French typography? Who's Eric Spiekerman? Who's Christian Schwartz? Who's Chris Soursby? These are things that you will go and spend hours and hours of your life researching if you read this book and if you're that type of person that just wants to learn more about typography. So even if you don't care about identifying all of these little details and recognizing the ink traps in a font so that you can identify it, even if you're not interested in doing any type design, if you're interested in typography at all, and you put in a little bit of effort, this is one of those things, like most things in life, where the more effort you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. But if you read this book and you go look up some of the names, the foundries, the type designers, the fonts, the compare to fonts that are on this little section here, if you go dive down these holes and you go look up the type history and things that you come across in here, don't feel obligated to do that. But whenever something seems interesting to you, go look something up. And I think that you'll have a really, really good time with this book. So now that we know who it's not for, now we know who it is for, let's go ahead and dive in. As with all of my book reviews, I tend to, I like to showcase the physical structure of the book itself. You can see it's got some nice binding on it there. Nice hardback book. There is only one edition of this book, so you're not going to have any trouble. You're either going to get the first edition or you're going to get the first edition. What there is, though, is there are two different versions of this book. They're exactly the same inside. Actually, I think there might be more editions now, but the original two in English, there was one for America and then there was one for Europe. And one that I have here is the Anatomy of Type. The other is going to be called the Geometry of Type. They're the exact same book. This one's white and red. That one is blue and white. So if you see two different covers by Stephen Coles, one's called Geometry of Type, one's the Anatomy of Type, don't buy both, just buy one. Buy whichever's cheaper. The same book. So my edition here, this was printed in 2012. The Geometry of Type was actually printed in 2013. This is the third printing of the book, but it is still the first edition. You can see, got some nice little blue end pages there. The pages themselves are very high quality. They're pretty thick. They're really glossy, as you can see. Unfortunately, there's not a good way to showcase the book and also hide the glossiness at the same time. But luckily, it doesn't detract too much. There's only a few pages where it's really going to be a nuisance in this video. But if you buy this in person, obviously, you can angle it however you need to get rid of that glare. So when you're reading this in person, it's not really going to be much of a bother. But you can see 2012 right there. And this is what we're looking at. Pretty simple table of contents, but it does give you a nice reference point to get to each section in the book. Nice forward, nice concise forward here by Eric Spiekerman. Introduction by Stephen Coles, of course. And then we get to a little bit of a manual inside the book. So this is how to use the book. This is Stephen's directions. I will point this out again when we get to the first spread. But if you purchase this book, probably the first thing you're going to do is just go flip through it. Ooh, what fonts are in here? What's in? Like, you're going to see this spread, and then you're going to actually start reading it, and you're going to see this little diagram here, and it's going to tell you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different steps to get through each spread. I think by the end of the book, you'll end up finding your own way to work through it, but you'll probably stick with 1 and 2 every single time. Glossary of typographic terminology. This is not exhaustive, but it is useful, and it does give some refreshers for anybody that's already familiar with some type terms, and a little bit of background for anybody who's diving in, at a deeper level for the very first time. So terms like aperture, bracket, character, counter, stuff that you've probably come across, but maybe you don't use these terms in your everyday life. So it's nice to have that in the front. I'll point this out. It's nice to have that in the front rather than in the back of the book, because then you get like quick refresh on these, and then you can dive into the contents rather than having it in the back of the book where you're just constantly flipping back and forth. Anatomy of Type, we saw this chart already. This is just a little bit more of an introduction here, talking about what the anatomy is. But we've all seen these before. If you've seen this before and you want to know more, this book is 100% for you. Here is the main structure of the book. These are his classifications. Obviously, there's no perfect classification system. And like I said, this book was printed in 2012. So there's not going to be anything from the last, 13 years. This was November 2012 this came out. I'm recording this in December of 2025. So I don't know if Stephen Coles would keep these exact same classifications. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. I think that they've stood up pretty well. Reading this 13 years later, I think that these have stood up pretty well. And I really like the classifications that he's gone with here. There are 2 different places here that he's going to give you definitions for these. These are type classifications at a glance. I think these are really useful, and I really like that he's got them all 15 of them laid out here for you right next to each other, because you can kind of go through them, and obviously they're going to be related in different ways, and you can compare and kind of find your way through this all on one spread. That's really, really nice. These here are great little explainers that dive a little deeper. Some of them are showing you what tools, what instruments would have been used to originally create the typefaces. Now, I don't think a lot of people are using the broad-nibbed pens and stuff like that to create these. Some people probably are, calligraphers that turn into type designers. They're definitely taking that route, and I could see that being beneficial. But in general, most people probably are not. Most type designers probably are not. But Still nice to know how the originals were made, just so you can have that mental model of how you would construct things, or in this case, how you would identify typefaces and the classifications. While I do love these little things, my one nitpick to start things off here is that I wish that these were at the beginning of each section. So rather than having this spread right here that's just got the 4 fonts, and these spreads here are the ones that are going to be the problem because it's color. I don't think it's going to matter too much. We'll get to all of the fonts anyway, but just to give you a heads up, these are the ones that I mentioned are going to be a little bit of a problem. Rather than having just this blank spread right here, what I would love to see if there's ever a second edition is to use this little introduction to it. Sorry, it's getting a little out of focus there. I would love to see this introduction added to these spreads. One cool thing I'm going to point out right now before we get past these definitions is that these spreads, so you can see Humanist Sans, it's yellow there. Humanist Sans, this is yellow. These yellow relates to this yellow here. And is that super important? No, it's not. But does it give you a sense of the level of detail that Stephen Coles has and that this book design has in general? We've got the red orange there and the red orange here. It just gives you that sense of like, oh, some care and attention went into this. And that's what you want when you're looking at the anatomy of type, when you're really trying to dig deep into all of the details and attributes of a typeface. So it's very, it builds confidence that when you're getting into this book, that the author knows what he's talking about. So I'm not going to read each one of these. What I am going to do though is I'm going to pull these up when we get to each section and read it to you then, because by the time you're 220 pages into this, you've forgotten these definitions 100%. So let's get things started here with Humanist Serif. The typeface you're seeing in red on your screen is Garamond Premier by Adobe. And I'm going to read the description that I mentioned before. This is going to be a direct quote from Stephen Coles each time we get to one of these sections. So I'm not going to repeat that, but you can see this is a direct quote out of the book each time. The first Roman typefaces, following centuries of handwritten forms, Humanist serifs have close ties to calligraphy. An oblique stress, gradually modulating from thick to thin, shows evidence of a pen held at a consistent angle. That angle is often echoed in letters topped with calligraphic terminals and finished with asymmetrical serifs that gently transition from the stem. As we go through the book, I am not going to give you, I'm not just going to read his descriptions and point out the anatomy and stuff like that. If you want all of the details from the book, please purchase the book and read that. I do have a link in the description and probably a pinned comment as well. But you could also just go look this up if you don't want to use my affiliate link. What I'm going to do is actually point out a lot of the seeds, a lot of the details that I thought were interesting, things that I got from reading this book. I am going to do like a full review and point out the things that I appreciate about the book, criticize a few little things, but I'm not going to be reading each one of these little details and teaching you every anatomy piece of every font that's in this. So if we were doing that, this video would be much longer, even longer than it is. But the first thing I'm going to point out, which I point out anytime we look at big specimens in books like this, and that is that looking at typography on a printed page is so much nicer than looking at on the screen. When you're looking at the screen, you're looking into a light, literally, and light shining into your eyes is never a comfortable experience. Your eyes just want to soak this up. And that was one of the things that I enjoyed about this book the most, is just looking at these nice big specimens, even when they're fonts that I've seen a bunch of times before. So we've got Adobe Jensen to kick things off appropriately. Kala. The next thing I'm going to point out here is that it's really nice, and this is well thought out by the author, and that is that you can flip back and forth between these. So that's something that I'm going to do quite often as we read this. But as he describes the differentiation, maybe he says right here, while Adobe Jensen calls direct attention to its antique roots, Kala just nods to them. And so like you can kind of look at like the A here maybe versus the A here, and you can see the calligraphic, where the nibbed pen or the broad stroke pen would have kind of gone down right there. It's not going down here. So those are the types of things that you'll be able to flip back and forth and look at. And there are much better examples that are more directly related than this one. But just to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing when I'm showing you this book and what you'll be doing when you read this book. Another thing pointed out here that we will see a trend throughout the book, it's pointed out that Bembo, when they were first digitizing this, a lot of the digital versions of it were much too delicate and didn't really hold on to what the original typeface would have looked like in metal, printed on paper back in 1495. But he points out this one here by Monotype, a Bembo book, and showcases it as a good example. So another thing that you're just learning when you're reading this, that some of these early digitized versions of a typeface might not really be that good for a number of reasons. I'll get into some more as we go along here. There's, and then on every page, we're not going to stop and like point out things, but I will give you just a second to look at it so you can see what's going on. FF Scala, very nice by Font. Lexicon here, I will stop and point out a couple of things that I think are cool. You can see the extenders. There are two different styles of this for lexicon. So there's lexicon number 2 and lexicon number 1. Actually, there are more styles than that, but there are two different families, I guess we could say. Lexicon number 2 has longer extenders, so it's going to go below and above the shorter ones for number 1. This was originally created for dictionaries. What do you want to do in a dictionary? Fit as much into the page as possible. And when you've got those long vertical paragraphs or vertical lines of text, the less leading that you have to spend, the less pages you have to use, the cheaper your book is to produce. And the smaller, more compact book that somebody could carry around. I know people aren't carrying around dictionaries anymore, but this typeface was created in 1982, and that's what it was created for. So I really like the purpose-built fonts, and it's just another one of those things that you could look at and think, like when I'm building a purpose-built font, or if I'm choosing a font for a very specific purpose, does it have these little details that can make a huge difference to my project? Optical sizes. There are a lot of examples of this, and this goes back to like what happened with the digitized versions of typefaces compared to the original metal type. We see a few different optical sizes here. There's going to be more examples than just mini in here, but mini in caption, mini in display. This is mini in regular up here. But even if we look at just display and caption's going to be, set at much smaller sizes, whereas display should be used at much larger sizes. Of course, you can break the rules, but if you use display at really small sizes, that really thin connecting portions, the serifs, they're just going to get lost in that really small print. And so that's why you beef things up and you use a little bit less contrast in the smaller sizes. So these, again, are things that you can learn if you want to get into type design, but they're also things that you can learn just to be a better typographer, a better designer, a better person at using typography in general. And Minion, along with a lot of other pro and premium typefaces, are going to have these different optical sizes. Now we've even got variable fonts that can do this with a slider, with an axis. So it's something to be aware of, and it's something to look out for. Garamond Premier, another very nice revival here by Adobe. I think we're all familiar with Garamond. We don't need to spend a ton of time on this, right? And that is going to be it for our first section on Humanist Serifs. The transitional serif that you're seeing at the top of this description is Baskerville with 2 V's, that's not a typo, by ANRT. And the description from Stephen Coles goes, as we move away from type's calligraphic roots, contrast increases and the stress axis turns more upright and variable within each typeface rather than staying consistent as it does in the Humanist serifs. Letters in these typefaces are more regular in shape and proportion, and apertures are slightly smaller. Transitional serifs still have a gradual bracketed transition from the stem, and terminals are often bulbous. Kicking things off here, we're going to have Adobe Caslon. And the first thing I want to point out with this one is an interesting choice by Stephen Coles here to include Adobe Caslon. And then down here we have Big Caslon. This wouldn't be strange if it was the same font, the same typeface, but it's actually 2 different typefaces. Big Caslon was designed by Matthew Carter. It's based on the original 3 largest sizes of Caslon, and up to the point when he designed this, no one had really done that before. They'd kind of gone with a one-size-fits-all digital version of the typeface, and that's another thing we've seen with the optical sizes and stuff. The metal would have been printed in different metal sizes. when type designers started doing it digitally, a lot of times they would just find one average one that would work best for most things. Big Caslon didn't do that. Big Caslon looked at the 3 largest display sizes for Caslon that were originally cut, and that's how this came about. But I just find it interesting because there's no mention of Matthew Carter in here. We just see the Adobe Caslon designed by Adobe, obviously, Carol Twombly, originally designed by William Caslon. But you can see the difference between like essentially what would be the display version versus the text version, the regular version. Do we have any overlapping characters here? Yeah, we've got an A. So you can see a little bit of a thicker stroke here on the regular Adobe Caslon, and then a little bit higher contrast in Big Caslon by Matthew Carter. Baskerville Original. This is by Storm Foundry. This is another one that he points out that is a good optical size one that doesn't just do a one size fits all. So he's got Baskerville 100 or 120 regular, and then Baskerville 10 regular here. This is also Baskerville 10 regular up here. But this is another place where you could kind of do a flip back and forth, Caslon and Baskerville. There's a lot of bit of an overlap here. I mean, obviously they're both transitionals, but you've got both of these coming out in the 1700s. So these would have been popular at the same time. Mrs. Eves. This is an interesting one for me because I know the story of Mrs. Eves. If you don't, Mrs. Eves was named after Sarah Eves. She was the eventually the wife of John Baskerville. At one point, his live-in housekeeper, I believe, and assistant, and mistress, as someone might say. But this was designed by Susanna Lichko, and it takes inspiration from Baskerville. In my brain, it took quite a bit more inspiration than it actually does. This is a great one where you can flip back and forth, and it is entirely designed to do so because, as you can see, this says resurfacing, as does Baskerville Original. So you can flip back and forth between these. That one does not say resurfacing, but there are some very specific instances where Stephen sets this up so that you can really compare the two. And if you look at the E here versus the E here, you can see that they have the same the same DNA. There's clearly inspiration being taken, but the E from Baskerville Original from Storm here, which is very, very close to the original, as the name implies, it's much softer on the edges, and whereas this one here has got a little bit sharper, brings it into modern times. It's almost 30 years old now, but 1996 this would have been very, very modern version, inspired by Baskerville, a sort of evolution. But it is interesting to look back and forth at these and see just how different Mrs. Eves really is. Planted, very nice. Arnhem. This is an interesting one because there's a quote in here that says, "Beauty comes from function." Anyone that's watched this channel knows that I am very much a fan of a purpose-built font, and this is a great example of it. So this was originally created for newspaper, and if you dig in and you read all of the details and you read a little bit of a history here, you will understand what this font was meant to do, and you will see, look at these ligatures up here, you will see that all the little design decisions that go into creating a typeface that's meant for one specific thing. And this isn't the only example of that. This isn't the only example of that in this book alone. But Arnhem here, a very good example of a purpose-built font. And it's just nice to see that. It's nice that it's pointed out. And again, it plays into those 3 different things where you could be thinking about this from the perspective of someone who wants to do design, someone who wants to learn about it, or someone who wants to go explore and find out what other typefaces were created specifically for newspapers or phone books or TV screens or low-res monitors, anything. Those are the types of the types of threads that I pulled on and kind of got lost in over the course of reading this book. Times New Roman, probably one of the most famous typefaces in the world. I'm not sure if this or Helvetica is more famous, but everyone knows Times New Roman. What you might not know is Le Monde Journal by Jean-Francois Porchet. This is the French evolution, let's say, of Times New Roman. So Times New Roman, originally created in 1932, United Kingdom. Stanley Morrison. This is Jean-Francois' version created. It says released 1997 to 2008. I'm not sure the exact year on that, but you can see this word right here. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I don't speak French, is the French translation of regulations. So you've got the flip back and forth that we've been doing on some of these, but this one here actually translates because we've got the English United Kingdom version, and then we've got the French evolution of it, almost a century later. And it is accordingly written in French, which I think is really cool. So those are the kind of details that you maybe will or won't catch, but they just add up to the enjoyability of reading this book. All of the thought and care that you can clearly see was put into this when you notice the little details like that. And just like that, we are on to rational serifs. The typeface you are seeing at the top of your screen is Dido. This version's by Linotype, of course, the original being by Furman Dido. And the description from Stephen Coles reads, at the opposite end of the spectrum from humanists, rational serifs have strong vertical contrast between thick vertical stems and fine horizontal hairlines. Because these typefaces are not so much written as constructed, their letter forms are very even in proportion and structure. Serifs are generally symmetrical and can be bracketed like Melior and Miller, or thin and abrupt like the Didones, Bedoni, and Dido. As you can see, we've got a nice long list of rational serifs to get through, so let's go ahead and get started. We've got two versions of Bedoni to look at. The first is Bauer Bedoni, and the second is ITC Bedoni. Just going to give you a quick look at ITC before we bounce back, and maybe you'll notice some differences here. Bauer Bedoni is much more of a display typeface, as you can see. This feels like Bedoni. This feels like the Bedoni that we all know and love, and there are some little details that I wanted to point out here with a slight sloping on the top of these terminals. And I think these are the type of little things that you would be able to recognize and help yourself pick out what type of Didone, I'm going to say Didone because it's just easier for me. What type of Didone you're looking at, and is it Bedoni? Is it Dido? Is it Lust? Is it some other new typeface that you're just coming across for the first time? If you can know to look at these tiny little anatomy pieces, then you will be much better suited to be able to recognize and identify what typeface you're looking at. So ITC Bedoni, this is another example of a little bit of truth being lost when it comes to the digitization of typefaces. Because when I think of Bedoni, when I think of Dido, when I think of Didones in general, I think of this. I think of just like the tiny serifs, the super thin mixed with the super thick. But the original Bedoni had text versions. This is ITC Bedoni 12 book, and it's literally designed to be able to use at 12 point. So this actually here is 6 point. So you've got 6, 12, 72, and you can see with the 72, you're getting pretty thin serifs at that point. You're not like the 6 point here that's pretty chunky. But the same DNA holds through because this is Bedoni after all. But ITC Bedoni does have a lot of nice optical sizes. And prior to reading this book, I literally, honestly didn't even know that Bedoni could be set at text sizes. And these are the types of seeds and seeds that you're going to get when you're reading this. If you're really interested in type history, these are the things that are going to stand out to you. They'll be the things that you go look up outside of just reading this book. And I think that's one of the major benefits of reading the anatomy of type. Next up, we have Dido, and you can see this as H and FJ. Again, this book is written in 2012, so this was prior to the split between Heffler and Freer-Jones. This was designed by Jonathan Heffler, and it stuck with Heffler. So whatever he's calling his foundry now, I can't quite remember. Heffler something, maybe Heffler & Co. It's with him, so they've renamed it to Heffler something Dido. But yeah, a nice Dido revival by Heffler and Freer-Jones at the time. But those are the interesting things. Let me just flip back real quick. Those are the interesting things about reading a book that is a little bit dated. The information is still incredibly valuable, but if you're interested in type history and you see things like this, there's a lot of foundries in here that you'll go look up and they've been absorbed by Monotype, or they've changed their name to something else, or they've been sold or purchased, acquired along the way. these are the types of things that you will find yourself doing as you read this book. And I'm going to repeat that a lot, but I'm going to point out the ones that I found interesting to me. Philosophia. So this is another take on Bodoni. Before we saw Zuzana Lichko, the same designer here, we saw her do Mrs. Eves, which was essentially her evolution, her take on Baskerville. Now we're seeing Philosophia. I'm not sure about where that name comes from, but this one is clearly inspired by Bodoni. So if we flip back a couple pages, this is the great thing that you can do. You flip back a few pages and you can look at Bodoni. That's the ITC. Here's the Bauer Bodoni. And you can see some of the inspiration coming through on these. Obviously, just like with Mrs. Eves, she's doing her own thing. But if you look at this smaller specimen up here, you don't look at the big one, you look at the smaller one up here, and then you compare that to the smaller specimen of Bodoni, then it kind of reveals itself. Philosophia has so much character at a large size that it almost disguises itself as being, a relative to Bodoni. But I think that's pretty cool. The description on New Century School Book totally called me out. I am as basic comes. I have a nostalgia. I have an affinity for New Century School Book simply because it was in school books. I'm not the only one. Fun note about me, I actually used this once when I worked at Louis Vuitton in order to get a project approved. I knew that I knew that my boss had previously been a New York City school teacher before she began working at Louis Vuitton. And I used New Century School Book because I thought that it might, pull on the same heartstrings, the same nostalgia that I have for this. And I can't say that that got my project approved, but it definitely didn't hurt. Again, if you're reading, I'm not going to dive into this one too much, but if you're reading these and you see Eric van Blokland, if you see House Industries, you see the Netherlands, you start seeing these themes repeat themselves, these people, these places, the foundries. You'll go and look those things up, or you'll remember the different designers and stuff like that. Ingeborg, interestingly, is the typeface that's written here in red. I actually didn't use that on my thumbnail because I only have the trial version of Ingeborg, and you can't just use it however you want. So I used Baskerville that we looked at earlier, Baskerville with 2 V's for my thumbnail. But this is the typeface that is on the cover of the book. I learned a new term when I came to Melior, and I'm not sure if that's how you say it or not. This is a German typeface. We'll just say that. It's by Hermann Zapf. So German type designer. This came out of Stempel back in 1952. And the term that I learned was super ellipse. And it's basically this squared off oval shape. And this is something that we've seen commonly in sans serifs, but Stephen Coles here points out that this is pretty uncommon to see in a serif typeface. So if you were looking for something that did have that super ellipse shape and you wanted to learn a new word, maybe you already know that. But if you wanted to use something that did have that super ellipse shape, this would be a great starting point. And you can see here a sans serif version. We've got Forza. We're going to look at that a little bit later. That has that super ellipse sort of shape to it. And once again, we find ourselves at a new section. This is Contemporary Serif. And the typeface you're looking at the top of this one is Scholar by Rosetta Type Foundry. I'm going to go ahead and read the description. In the last 40 years, type designers have borrowed the most pragmatic aspects of the previous styles to develop a new breed of highly functional text faces. Designed to solve the problems of various substrates and reading environments, these designs generally sport a much larger X height and lower stroke contrast than traditional serif typefaces, but are otherwise not directly related. They range from spatially economic, Swift, to the informal and energetic Doko. Not quite as long of a list here of contemporary serifs, but I'm sure after 13 years, Stephen Coles could find us quite a few more of these to add in. It seems like more and more typefaces don't neatly fit into containers these days. Scholar, this is the one that we looked at on the top of the description just a second ago. And if someone read me the description of what this typeface is supposed to be, I would just assume that it's not going to work. You'd have to read the description here to really get into it. But if you start looking at all of the rules that it's breaking and all of the different ink traps and the connections between the arms and the legs and the curved leg here, there are just so many little things that set this typeface apart when you really start looking at it that you would think maybe wouldn't all work together, but somehow create such a charming typeface. You can see I thought that there was 2 pages here. This paper is nice and thick. Again, a little glossy, but a nice thick, nice crisp printing on the white pages. It's not like a cream or anything. You can see through the pages a little bit if you're really pressing them down and trying to look through, but it's a very nice, well put together book. Phaedra probably should have been before Scholar. I don't have a lot of criticisms about this book. I think it's very well put together, as I just said. But inside of Scholar here, we do see Phaedra Serif mentioned, and then we turn the page, and then we see a Phaedra Serif. Typically, he's very, very good about putting the typeface before that gets mentioned after, but this is going to be one of those cases where you read about Phaedra Serif. If you're not already familiar with it, then you turn the page and you're like, oh, hey, that's the typeface they were talking about. So then you kind of like go back and forth to like figure out what your thoughts are on it. But man, this is just so nice. Like the splayed legs on this, the open bowl there, the diamond here, the slightly not touching K. I have a story about that later. Even just looking at the typefaces, if you didn't even read anything and all you did was flip through this, looking at the typefaces, I think you would have a good time doing just that alone. There's so much more to get out of this. Like I said, you're going to get out whatever you put into it. But even if you just did that, I think you're going to really, really enjoy this book. This is an interesting one because Meta Serif pairs with Meta. Obviously, Meta is the sans, but it also pairs with FF Unit and FF Unit Slab. We're going to look at another one of these later. But these 4 these 4 typefaces were all built to work together. I think that's a really interesting thing. It's kind of like a super blended family. You can see here how Doko, when we read the description, it's taking pieces from all of these different classifications that we've seen before. But this typeface, this contemporary typeface, has essentially nothing else to do with the other contemporary typefaces. It's very much doing its own thing. And you can see especially the italic version here. That's really, really cool. Inscribed and engraved typefaces. This typeface you're seeing at the top of the screen there is Albertus. This version is by Monotype. There are other versions, but the version we're looking at here is from Monotype. And the description from Stephen Coles reads, unlike the other serif styles derived from the stroke of a pen or brush, the typefaces in this category have a closer relationship to letters that are carved or chiseled from stone, also known as glyphic, or engraved on a hard surface like copper or steel. These typefaces can end their strokes with long, graceful serifs like Trajan, sharp-wedged serifs like Modesto, or no serifs at all, but a thickening flare instead, like Albertus. Again, that's what we're looking at the top of the screen here. Once again, a short list for this here, for this section, but I think we've got some real bangers. Starting out with Luxury Diamond. This actually came in 3 different styles. There was Luxury Diamond, Luxury Gold, and Luxury Platinum, and it was released with a price tag of $1,500 when it first came out for those 3 fonts. A little bit of a stunt. It did end up reducing in price after a while, but it was a commentary on these types of luxury typefaces. You can see we've got the Prada R there, but then we've also got an alternate swatch there. House Industries, always doing some really cool stuff. Again, you'll start to see some names in here. Christian Schwartz, Dino Sanchez, and then you'll see those names repeated, and eventually you'll go and look them up to see what else they've done. Albertus, we saw this right off the jump. You've probably come across this typeface before. Maybe you didn't know the name, maybe you didn't know the history, but you recognize that typeface, I'm sure. Modesto, this is by Jim Parkinson. Unfortunately, died this past year, 2025, but leaves behind an incredible typographic legacy. You can see there are a few different versions of Modesto here. There are initials with the outline on it, expanded just a little bit wider, and open that has the inline drawn inside of the characters there. This just like screams heritage to me. I think you could put this on any restaurant, any beer, anything that you wanted, you know, not a tech startup or something like that, but anything that you wanted to have like a little bit of street cred, throw Modesto on there, make it, you know, put your logo in that, put this at the top of your headers, put it at the top of a poster. And it's just going to feel like whatever brand you have has existed for years and years. Yeah. Jim Parkinson put out a ton of great typefaces. Did some great interviews as well. Go check him out for sure. Trajan, everyone knows Trajan, right? Even in 2012, this was being noted as being overused in movie posters. I don't have any bad feelings about Trajan. I don't have any bad feelings about most typefaces. It doesn't bother me if a typeface is overused. If a typeface is a good design, and Trajan is arguably a great design, then I still think that it's a great typeface, no matter whether it's been overused or not. Am I going to use it in a project knowing that it's been used way too much, or, you know, in the author's opinion, way too much? No, that's a good thing to know. I'm probably not going to use it on a movie poster, considering that it's been used in so many, but that doesn't mean that this is a bad typeface just because it's been used too much. Grotesque Sans, the typeface that you're looking at the top there in red, is Monotype Grotesque by, you guessed it, Monotype. The description from Stephen Coles reads, when sans serif printing type first appeared in the early to mid 1800s, some found the style so strange they called it grotesque. These typefaces kept the nickname even after they gained popularity, and grotesque is now associated with any sans serif in this early style. The characteristics of grotesque typefaces are similar to those of the transitional and rational serifs. Regular proportions, relatively static forms based on the oval and fairly closed apertures, with some strokes turning inward. Just got 3 grotesque sans to look at. Funny enough, none of them are monotype grotesque. I didn't have access to any of these, so I used another alternative. So that's a free one for you. But you can see when you look at these, they do look like someone just chopped the serifs off of a typeface. Obviously, they've done more work to it than that. And these are not the original grotesques, but they are inspired by those original grotesque sans. I really liked this little notched one. It says that it's notched one is historical form, uncommon today. Those are the tiny little things that you'll note. You probably won't be able to see it on this small specimen here, but it does help a little bit with the legibility between the L, the 1, and the I. Obviously, this alternate one here that has a conventional form is going to be the most legible out of the 2 options. But I do think it's fun to see that little notch version. And I wouldn't mind seeing that in some other typefaces, even if it wouldn't be 100% historically accurate. You know, if it's not just a grotesque sans thing, I'm not sure if it is or not. And our last one, FF Bow. Just like that, we are on to Neo-Grotesque Sans. I don't think Neo-Grotesque Sans need too much of an introduction. You can see up there in red, that is Helvetica by Linotype, but let's go ahead and read the description by Stephen Coles, just so we can define this as best as possible. Neo-grotesques are even more rationalized extensions of the grotesque style. These typefaces, pioneered by Helvetica and Universe, no, I'm not going to say Univers, have little stroke contrast, horizontal terminals, and quite closed apertures. Their homogenized forms are graphically appealing at large sizes, so they are often fare better in display settings. So as we go along, you will learn, I mean, you can surmise that what we're doing is moving along historically here, where you've got these grotesque sans that were essentially cutting off the serifs. Then we've got the neo-grotesque sans, where they're refining this concept. And Universe and Helvetica really were the standouts. They came out the same year. Universe is the first example we've got here. This is by Adrian Frutiger, and it's probably pretty familiar to most of you. New Helvetica. I typically we see this as Helvetica New these days. I know that it's Neue. I say New. Evolution of Helvetica, and I can understand why this is here after Universe, because it would be the revised version in the 80s, you know, following the original Helvetica in 1957. I don't think we need to say much about those two. They're pretty well known. You probably recognize them, but it still is fun to go back and look at the anatomy of it and get even more details and study them a little bit and see what they're doing. Antique olive. This is an interesting one because you might not notice it at first, but you can see there is a horizontal stress here where the top and bottom are just slightly heavier than the sides. So you've got a horizontal stress as opposed to typically having that vertical stress. And it just adds a bit of character to this. This was created during the 60s. This feels very 60s to me. I really like Antique Olive. We've seen a number of revivals of this. Some are better than others. We've seen some inspirations that aren't direct revivals come out even this year on Typography News. But if you've ever seen Antique Olive and you're like, man, there's just something about it. It's probably, I mean, it's got a huge X height, no extenders. You know, look at these descenders and look at these ascenders. They're essentially non-existent. That's a huge standout that makes it really playful. But the thing you might not be noticing is that slight horizontal stress on there, that reversed contrast. Gothic Sans. The typeface you're looking at the top there in red is News Gothic by Monotype. And the description from Stephen Coles reads, some English and American variants of the grotesque styles are known as Gothics. While the differences are sometimes in names alone, there are a few distinctions that can be drawn, at least from the selection in this book. These include a large X height, forms that are simpler and more static, very low contrast, and often a condensed width with an upright stance derived from flat-sided rounds. Typefaces like Den, designed by engineers for industrial use, could be considered geometric sans serifs, but also share many traits with these Gothics. A nice concise list for us here, but probably some names that you're going to recognize. Bell Centennial, News Gothic, Benton Sans, Whitney. Let's hop into it. Kicking things off with Bell Centennial, probably one of the most well-recognized purpose-built fonts. This was created for phone books, not a lot of use case in 2025, but in 1978, this would have been peak utility coming from one of the masters, Matthew Carter. As you can see, as you probably learned if you've taken any typography class or read any intro typography book, it's got these huge funky looking ink traps, and those would have been used to catch the ink on cheap paper printed at small sizes. One really cool thing that I like about this typeface, you can see this says Bell Centennial names and numbers. Maybe you can, maybe you can't see that. Just trust me. It says names and numbers. That is not the name of the font. That is not the name of the typeface. That is the name of the font. That is the style. Rather than have weights, this one is purpose built, and it's got 4 different weights. It goes from the lightest to the heaviest. Lightest is address, subcaption, name and number, and then a bold listing. I'm just tapping my finger here. I know you can't actually see these typefaces. But yeah, so address would have been the lightest. Subcaption would have been like a regular typeface. Name and number would have been a little bit heavier. And then bold listing is obviously nice and bold. What's cool about that is that you don't have to think. Let's say this is a phone book and you've got 3 different lines here. I don't have to choose like, oh, what is the address going to be? What's the name going to be? What's the phone, like, what's the name and number? What's the subcaption going to be? You don't have to remember what weight it's supposed to be. You don't have to set your styles, nothing. Just pick the name and number for the name and number. Just pick the address for the address, and Matthew Carter has got you covered. I think that's really cool. We see a lot of weird names coming out with new fonts. Sometimes they're playful and stuff like that, but one that's like this, that's actually utility built into it, make it essentially dummy proof. I really, really like that. That's really fun. That's really useful. Maybe not in 2025, but the spirit of that usefulness is still there. And maybe you could build that into something that you're working on. Benton Sans. I kind of skipped over News Gothic here. There is a reason for it. Benton Sans is seen as the evolved version of News Gothic. So News Gothic originally created in 1908. I'm fairly certain that this version here, saying 1908, is also because it's based on the original design of News Gothic. The version we're looking at here was from the Bitstream staff. It's labeled as 1958. This version here is labeled as 1995 to 2008. And it's another interesting one where you can flip back and forth between these and kind of see like what's different, what makes Benton Sans better, as the author says that it is a welcomed update to News Gothic. So you can go in and kind of look at all those little details and see what it is that improves it. Whitney, another nice Gothic Sans here. And just like that, once again, we're on to a new section. This is Geometric Sans. No surprise here, the typeface in red that says Geometric Sans is Futura. We can't talk about Geometric Sans without talking about Futura. This version is actually Futura 100 by Type Together. And the description from Stephen Coles for this classification is: the most static and clinical of all classifications, geometric sans serifs are constructed out of geometric forms with round parts that are circular or square. It's important to note that while shapes like the O appear exactly round, most proper typefaces do not contain perfect circles, but are optically corrected to appear as round as possible while harmonious with other letters. Geometrics have minimal stroke contrast, and italics are commonly slanted versions of Romans rather than cursive in form. Not a short list here at all for Geometric Sans. You can see a full page of typefaces, so let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, we cannot talk about Geometric Sans serifs without talking about Futura. This is even another version of it. There are plenty of interpretations of Futura from different foundries out there. This is Futura ND. Another nitpick that I'm going to make here is that the author mentions that Paul Renner and Futura are Bauhaus. They are not Bauhaus. Paul Renner was actually very, very vocal about not being related to Bauhaus. He actually taught at a school, in a different school in Germany, and he wanted to be very well known that he created Futura and released it prior to the universal alphabet coming out of the Bauhaus. And he also wanted everyone to know that his typeface was actually usable, while theirs was never actually a production typeface. So a little bit of nitpick there, and a common misconception that Futura gets lumped in with Bauhaus because they were both in Germany. They did release, they were popular around the same time, but Paul Renner is distinctly separate from Bauhaus. Avenir. I love Avenir. Adrian Frutiger describes this as a better version of Futura. And in terms of charm, in terms of soul, in terms of, if a typeface can have soul, in terms of vibes alone, I would say Futura has stood the test of time. In terms of utility and usability, I do think Avenir takes the best parts of a geometric sans serif inspired by Futura, and really turns that into something that's much more usable. And we're going to talk about this here in a little bit, this famous Frutiger K, where the K just barely touches right there. Very aesthetically pleasing, very nice, and a little bit different from what we see from a lot of typefaces where the leg of the K meets the arm. Another detail that you can look at and recognize in typefaces to help identify them. Now, the uppercase K does meet in a very similar way to this Frutiger K here, but the lowercase K of Futura doesn't. It's very slightly connected to the arm. So these are the details that you'll start to pick up when you read this book. These are the details that are going to be useful as a typographer, type designer, type nerd in general. I like that there is this evolution here as well. So we're going from Futura to Avenir to Gotham, and you can see it's getting, this isn't entirely usable. You can use it for headlines and stuff, and I've seen books written in Futura. It's not the worst thing ever, but you get to Avenir and it's a little bit more usable, and then you get to Gotham and it just brings it into the 21st century. We've got Avenir in 1988, Gotham in 2000, and Gotham had a real moment, right? In the late 2000s, early 2010s. Obama, gave this a ton of gas when he used it for the campaign, both campaigns, but particularly the 2008 campaign. Gotham already, had been popular for the first 8 years of its existence, but really became popular then in the campaign. And those are the things that you want to know. Like I said with Trajan earlier, like you want to know these things, but don't ever let that make you think that a typeface isn't good or great. Gotham is distinctly a great typeface. Avant-garde Gothic, man, I love this typeface. I overuse this as a student so much because Herb Lubalin, ITC Avant-Garde, this is just a beautiful typeface. I love all of these ligatures and the interlocking characters and stuff like that. You have to have the pro version. You have to have the version that has all these glyphs to really make it work for you. Unfortunately, when I was in school, I didn't have those glyphs. I just had the standard. I had ITC Avant-Garde standard or whatever came with like the Adobe Font Folio at the time. So I couldn't do all the cool stuff, but I still love this typeface so much. I overused it. But when I think of geometric sans serifs, Future is number 1, Avant-Garde is number 2. I mean, look at these big circular glyphs. Crazy, crazy, crazy. And the very distinctive are that doesn't, that where the bowl is open. That's going to be another thing that you'll learn, that can make you easily identify a typeface when you see that. Calibre and metric. I didn't know that these were actually related. I don't know that I've ever seen them side by side like this, but now I feel really silly that I didn't notice this coming out of Klim Type Foundry. And it's basically 2 takes on the same bone. So you can see here we've got the S with the horizontal stroke versus the vertical stroke. We've got the T with no tail, the T with a tail. You got the sharp German Esset here versus the nice round one. You've got the G with the flat side on it or the round side. You've got the M that doesn't go to baseline, the one that does. So these would be interchangeable to some extent. Obviously, you wouldn't take one letter from one typeface and stick it in another. I guess unless you were doing a logo or something, that could be kind of cool. But you could swap out Calibre and metric and essentially fill up the same space and things like that. But I think these would be best used either on their own or as headline and body copy, or mix and match them in ways that make sense. But I wouldn't interchange the actual glyphs or characters. FFDIN, this is, as Stephen notes, a design by committee and, quote, an unusually successful design by committee. I had no knowledge of where DIN came from. This is another one of those rabbit holes to dive down. I'm not going to try to pronounce the German, but DIN is DIN. It's an acronym for the German Institute for Standardization. Basically, a bunch of engineers got together and built this typeface, and it's a beautiful thing. I love DIN. There have been a lot of reinterpretations of this. This one here is by Font, hence the FFDIN. But yeah, it's another rabbit hole to dive down. It's just nice to look at the different anatomy of it. And that's what this entire book is all about. Interstate, can you guess what this is inspired by? American US federal highway signs. Another one from Tobias Freer Jones. Clavica. I actually reached out to Eric Olson on this one, and it was about this K. I mentioned before there was a K that didn't quite meet. I emailed him and said, why did you do this? I see a lot of typefaces with that Frutiger K where it just barely touches. I was really interested in knowing why he did that. And before I get to the answer, let me point out this F right here was essentially the basis for creating the original Facebook logo. If you remember that original F, that's where it came from. And this is incredibly iconic for Web 2.0. This was essentially, it came out in 2004 and, was just the peak of Web 2.0 typography. Let me read you the email response from Eric about this K, because I think it's kind of interesting. He said, with over 20 years of distance from its release, I wish I had a better answer. From a legibility or readability standpoint, there isn't a reason. A connected K works better, mostly. I always try the connected so-called Frutiger K first when designing a typeface, partly because I love how it looks, and mostly because it doesn't remind me of every typeface. At the time, I'm sure I pushed the connection out to add a unique element to the typeface, something to pull it further away from the familiar themes. In truth, I probably wouldn't do it now, largely because there aren't disconnected similar elements for the Ks to relate to within the rest of the typeface, or within the rest of the type design. Lastly, the spacing of Clavica is very of its time, wide, so it just kind of works. This is such a simple explanation, but I really, really, really appreciate the insight. And I think it's important on us, if you're interested in these types of things, go find out, go ask somebody, go ask the type designers. They won't be around forever. I'm not saying that Eric Olson is going anywhere right now. But I'm just saying, if you want to know what this is, if you think someone in the future might want to know the answer to some of these questions, go ask somebody and try to find out. But you can see this disconnected K right here. It is interesting that he notes like, oh, I wouldn't do it now because there isn't anything else that's disconnected. But I do think that it adds a nice piece of charm, and you can see how that would have come. We've looked at the Frutiger K that just kind of touches there. We've got one right here with FF unit where it just barely touches. At small sizes, you're not really going to notice that. The capital and the lowercase k both do that. But you can also see a bit of the spacing here. So you can see there's quite a bit of space between these. So you're not going to have the problem where you confuse this K with being like an L plus another character. When it's nice and widely spaced, like things were in 2004, I also asked him about that. But when it's nice and widely spaced like this, you don't have a problem with having a small space there where the arm and leg just don't touch. I do like the note on this Solana Gothic here that says ear extends from the top of the G like an apple stem. You got the two G's here, you've got the alternate, but this one here comes right out of the top. Typically you're seeing the ear come out of the side there. So I like that. But this typeface here is another interesting one. This was specifically designed, it says, as a display face for the city of Albany near San Francisco. And it was made to work with 20th century architecture. So not like a single building, not a single sign or a brand or something. It needed to work with an entire neighborhood and also work in modern settings. So I think they achieved this very well. This is a nice typeface, but it's very purpose-built typeface, even as a bit of a display face. And I love to know the backstories. I love purpose-built typefaces. I love the backstory. This one's doing both. Very nice. Forza, this is a good example here that geometric sans don't just have to be the big circles like we saw with ITC Avant-Garde or Futura. You can have those square shapes. You've almost got kind of like a barrel shape here with this O, but you can have these square shapes and that's still geometric. A square is still geometry. So good reminder for me. Maybe it's a good reminder for you as well. Humanist Sans, the typeface you're looking at top in red, is Chronos by Adobe. The description from Stephen Coles reads, like their serif counterparts, Humanist Sans have roots in calligraphy. Their round, dynamic, open forms have higher stroke contrast than the other sans serif classifications, though not as much as most serifs. These typefaces sometimes share the binocular G and variable letter width of their serif sisters. Their italics are true italics with cursive forms of A, G, E, and sometimes a descending F. Once again, we've got a nice long list of Humanist Sans to look through here. I like to see how bluntly Stephen Coles points this out. He says that Gil Sans is an awkward mix of geometric and humanist ideas. Why do I like to see this pointed out? Because I've never been able to put words to my feelings about this typeface. I do have sort of an affinity for this typeface. Every time I see it, I enjoy it. I like it. I think, oh, I'm going to use Gil Sans. I tried to put it in a project. I try to put it to work. And just those awkward features, the awkward mix just never seems to work for me. FF Yoga Sans, this is another good example of being able to compare in the book because this is considered a Gil Sans for the 21st century, so you can look back and forth. One thing to note about this one doesn't have the same words like we've seen previously. Why do I think Stephen did this? I think he did this because there are just such unique characters in each one of these typefaces that using the exact same word, while it would make it useful for flipping back and forth like this, I think you'd be missing out on some of these really unique characters that might not be such standouts in both typefaces. So it's cool to be able to flip back and forth between these, even if the words are not exactly the same, though in most cases they are the same or pretty similar. Myriad. I never knew that Myriad was so closely related to Frutiger. I guess that this has been, it says a skeptic might denigrate this typeface, calling it simply Adobe's Frutiger. It does clearly owe a lot of inspiration to Frutiger. And when you look at the two back to back, you're flipping back and forth like this, you can see a lot of the similarities, but you can immediately start to notice some of the differences. By the time you get 163 pages into this book, you'll note that this M is splayed, whereas this one is very vertical. You've got the square dot here, you got the round dot there. There are going to be a lot of difference between these, but I do think it's interesting because personally for me, Myriad, it was the default font in Adobe for a long time. So I would just immediately change it when I was working on a project. No way I'm going to use the default font. and get called out for it when I'm in school or something like that. So I would always change it, but seeing how closely related to Frutiger it is, it's kind of interesting, and it's something that I would take another look at today. For Dana, another very, very well-known typeface that you're probably all familiar with. Syntax. I like when a designer makes a very distinct decision. You might not be able to notice it on the screen because maybe my book's a little bit crooked here, but this has a slight lean to it. All the letters are just slightly leaning to the right. And what that does is it guides the reader's eye as you're reading from left to right. Does this disqualify this typeface from being a workhorse now? Yeah, probably. You're not going to want your letters to always slant, but you've got this very specific typeface now. So rather than being a workhorse or like a streetcar, you've got a race car. You've got, something that's differentiating between like a road bike and a mountain bike. You've got something that's purpose built, and I can respect when a type designer does that. Chronos, this is the typeface that we saw at the start of this chapter here on the description screen. Thesis, so this is the Sans. Thesis is a superfamily that's like the serif, the mix, the antique, the sans. There are a bunch of these created by Lucas Fonts, and they all go together, and it's a very nice family. The funny thing I thought about this one that I wanted to point out was that this Q right here, this is an alternate glyph for a Q, was originally the default Q. So I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see it, but you got a pretty typical Q up here in the top right in the small specimen. But it's funny that it originally shipped with this funky looking Q with the disconnected tail on it. Reading the book about Paul Renner, it was funny some of the characters that shipped with the original Futura, and there's another example of things not really changing that much over what almost 100 years, 70 years. Auto, this is a really interesting one too. There's 100 fonts in here. I think most of them are interesting, but this one's got Auto 1, Auto 2, and Auto 3, and the italics get increasingly, I don't know what you would even say, increasingly more extreme as you go along. So the Auto 1 italic, it's got a slant to it. It's got some cursive to it. It looks nice. But then you get to 2 and you start to get some more calligraphic structures extended. You've got the extension here. You've got the little loop on the R, whereas this one here has a straight leg. You get down to Auto 3 italic, and you're getting these giant swashes coming out. You even got the serif on the bottom of the R. These A's and G's, they swoop through the stem so far that it's like you're writing with speed. Boom. And you curve back around. They all feel cohesive. This feels like one font. This feels like one typeface, but it would be really cool to play around with this in the right project. Optima, we're probably all very familiar with Optima too, right? And once again, we are under a new chapter. This is Neo-Humanist Sans. Neo-Humanist Sans in red is written in amplitude by orange italic. And the description from Stephen Coles says, the digital era gave birth to new sans serifs and share characteristics with other classifications, but are individual enough to deserve a label of their own. Many of these have a dynamic structure that could be considered an evolution of the Humanist Sans, but stroke contrast is reduced and apertures are even more open. The round shapes of typefaces in this category tend to be more square than their predecessors, and X heights are larger on the whole. As we look through these 5 typefaces, I think that you'll see, as with all of his descriptions so far, that is a very accurate description of Neo-Humanist Sans. Amplitude, that's the typeface that we just looked at on that title card there. One thing to note about Amplitude is that at this point in the book, you're probably going to be looking at these little details, the small specimens here. You're going to be looking at the big specimens here before you read this description. This is something that I was talking about before, where you'll find your own way to read this. So the direction that he tells you to read it is 1, 2, title, details, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's great. It's great to have some direction. when you're first getting started. By the time you get halfway through this book, you'll start reading it in different directions. I was always still going 1, 2, but sometimes I would mix up these 3 here, read them in different directions. What I started doing towards the end and at this point is I would look at the small specimen first, try to see what details are there. I noticed the ink traps, so then I looked at this and I was looking at all these unique little ink traps and I was like, man, I wonder what this is for. And I was really trying to think and I made an educated guess in my head. And then I read the description and I was very disappointed to find out that they are entirely aesthetic. So unlike Bell Gothic that was designed with a real purpose, these are just to look cool. And there's nothing wrong with that, but look at this X. If I was choosing between a normal X and this X, there's no way I'm going to choose that one. At small sizes, are you going to notice? No, it looks perfectly fine at the small sizes. So as long as you're using the amplitude at small sizes, you're not going to notice this weird stuff. Or if you want some of these weird, quirks and ink traps and things like that, maybe this would be a good one to choose. But for me, I like the purpose-built font. I like the ink traps to be ink traps for a reason. I know there's been a trend for a while now where ink traps are not serving any purpose. But I really prefer when they do serve a purpose. FF Dax. This really popularized this look in the late 90s, in the early 2000s. For me, when I see this, I just think of Ubuntu. I cannot not see Ubuntu when I see these letters with no spurs and no tails on them, where the stem just doesn't keep going and like the shoulder connects right to the top of that stem, or the D here, there's no tail on this. The R, there's no, it connects right to the top of the stem. This is a very specific look, and maybe it's because I was like coming of age during Y2K. This released in 95 to 97. I was graduating like 8th grade in 2000. So this feels very much of that period to me. But now I only associate it with Ubuntu. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about it. FF Balance. This is very aptly named. I'm actually going to grab my little pen here so I can point out a few things in a little more detail. Similar to, so we do have these ink traps here, and I think they work at nice sizes. These are intentionally, these ink traps here are added intentionally so that the typeface can still work at small sizes. But that's not what I want to talk about. This does have a reverse contrast to it, similar to Antique Olive. So you can really see it on the A here, where this A is really thick on top. You can see the O is really thick on top, but it's not an exact reverse contrast. It's actually kind of like heavier on top. So this balance is kind of funny. If you can see right here, this 8 is actually heavier. I don't know if you're really able to see that. It's not really focusing too well. The 8 is bigger on the top than it is on the bottom. The 3 is bigger on top than it is on bottom. The S is bigger on top than it is on the bottom. So the balance is this, like, I don't know if it's supposed to be a joke, but it's like this, it's balancing upside down, because typically we would think, and we would put the bigger part of the S on the bottom so that it could, like, if it was a physical thing, that it would balance. I really like this typeface. I really like this, this concept. And it's another one that you wouldn't think would work if someone just explained it to you. But when you see it in person and you see the purpose-built ink traps and stuff like that, it does. It just works. And it's really fun and it's really playful. And it's a typeface that I was not familiar with prior to reading this book. Grotesque Slab. The typeface that we're looking at up top in red is Clarendon by Linotype, and the description from Stephen Coles reads, "If one were to weigh the typical examples of each classification, these bulky beasts would tip the scales furthest. They aren't simply grotesque sans serifs with slab serifs slapped on, but these typefaces do reflect the proportion, structure, and stroke contrast of their serifless counterparts. Ball terminals are common among grotesque slabs, as are heavy bracketed serifs and closed apertures. The effect of these attention grabbers can be decorative and eye-catching and usually very bold." Another short list here. We've just got 4 typefaces, but these are very interesting to look at. It's funny to me, and I know we've seen really old typefaces, but it's funny to me, when I got to this page, I saw this 1845 and I was like really, really digging into this typeface, looking at everything, looking at how closed these apertures are, looking at, how appealing this typeface is. This was a headline typeface that's not condensed. Most headline typefaces are, very narrow to fit more on a page or on a poster. This one's just doing so many unique things. and it's by Vincent Figgins. It's released originally in 1845. This version of it is by David Berlot from Front Bureau. But what struck me at this moment was that this person created this typeface, 180 years ago? And I'm sitting here so engrossed with it. I'm so, so much enamored with this typeface that I'm sitting here talking about it on a video for you to watch. And we're looking at this typeface and we're carrying on this tradition. And it just feels like this important thing to like recognize that this is what typography is. And I don't know. I just love that that's what our lives are, that this is what we get to do is look at fun typefaces like this, use these typefaces, and for some people, even design typefaces. There's a lot to talk about this one, but I think I've spent enough time on this page. Clarendon. There are no perfect typefaces. There are no perfect typefaces that can be used in every situation, but as a self-contained typeface, I really think Clarendon is pretty perfect. I think we're all familiar with it, but when you look at it in print and you just see like the little tails on the R perfectly match the A, and you've got a little bit bigger version of it for the T, the ball terminals on the ear for the G match the R, match the C, match the A. Like, this is a perfectly cohesive typeface. Love those numerals as well. Yeah, seeing this in print just made me appreciate it so much more. Pharaoh. I think that this is kind of funny. Pharaoh and Giza are both named after Egyptian terms. And it's funny to me because Egyptian was the original name for slab serifs. It's still used in France. I don't know how to say the French version of it, but essentially Egyptian means slab serif. So I thought it was funny that these two were named after Egyptian, hearkening back to that original term that would have been used. Heron serif. This is got a nice comparison here to Den, and you really, as soon as you know that, you recognize it immediately. It's doing Den even better than Den, in my opinion. Like, I love these slab serifs on here. It feels even more mechanical. It feels even more structured. I think that Den itself is probably more legible in reading and things like that, but Heron serif would be great for headlines, I think. One unique thing about this is the serif tail. You don't really see a tail of a Y that's got a big slab serif going across both sides of it like that. Geometric Slab. The typeface you're looking at there in red is Memphis by Linotype, and the description from Stephen Coles reads, "These slab serifs share the geometrically round or square shapes of their sans counterparts. Rectangular serifs are unbracketed and generally the same weight as the stems. In fact, all strokes are essentially the same weight, lacking any perceptible contrast. The R leg is a straight diagonal, and G is normally of the monocular form." At this point, one thing I really started to notice was that the terminology does get absorbed passively. There was no point where I was sitting taking notes, trying to memorize different things. But as I was looking at this small specimen here, I went, that M has slightly splayed legs. Like, before reading this book, I had never used the word splayed in my entire life. But that's just what happens as you read this book. You passively absorb the terminology, you recognize things. I mean, we're 200 pages into this at this point. But you really do start to pick up on the terms without really having to put in a ton of effort. Neutroface. I had always called this Neutroface, and I assumed that it was named Neutroface. There's Neutroface and Neutroface Slab. So this is the slab version. Neutroface Slab is actually Neutroface Slab, named after Richard Neutra. I always thought that this was named Neutra because it was supposed to be neutral, but it's actually named after the architectural typography of or architectural lettering rather, of Richard Neutra. So the correct way to pronounce this would be Neutroface Slab. And I know earlier in the book I said Helvetica New. I think there's a difference between a person's name and the word new in German versus English. That's my, at least that's my excuse. Rockwell. So we looked at Memphis in the title card there, but this is Rockwell. These two are not one and the same, but they do kind of pair together. I would say Rockwell and Memphis are kind of like the Bodoni and Dido, the Futura and Avant-Garde. They are the two that I immediately think of when I think of slab serifs. And so I always thought that one of these was the first. I was wrong. Rockwell is actually an evolution of Litho-Antique. I know you can't read that, but I am pointing at it. Litho-Antique actually released about 20 years before Rockwell or Memphis. And Rockwell is kind of the continuation of Litho-Antique. The funny thing is that in the 1930s, according to Fonts in Use, which is also created a website created by Stephen Coles along with his partner in that, the website notes that Litho-Antique actually started to become known as Rockwell Antique during the 1930s because Rockwell became so popular. But it really was the successor to Litho-Antique. So it would essentially be, like the Helvetica new to Helvetica. So Rockwell, people knew that. So people started saying Rockwell Antique when they were referring to Litho-Antique. Humanist Slab, the typeface you're looking up top there is PMN Cecilia by Monotype, and that is also the typeface that's on the cover of this book as well as on the thumbnail. Not for the big red words, but for the black and the blue. And the description from Stephen Coles reads, put simply, you could take a Humanist Sans serif and add unbracketed rectangular serifs and get pretty close to a Humanist Slab. These typefaces often have less stroke contrast than their sans counterparts, and the serifs are sometimes wedge-shaped. Wedge-shaped. That's kind of hard to say. PMN Cecilia was not just used in this book, but it was also the first typeface used specifically for Kindle. So Amazon licensed this from Linotype, and that is where I recognize this name from. I was trying to figure out, where do I recognize that typeface from? Since 2015, I think it's been replaced by Bookerly, but you could probably still go back and choose Cecilia if you wanted to, but maybe you will recognize this name, this font, and maybe it is from your Kindle from 2007 to 2015. One thing I noted about FF Unit Slab, and this is one of those things where you'll start to see names repeated. This is essentially an all-star lineup of type designers here. Christian Schwartz, Eric Speakerman, Chris Soursby. I did mention them earlier when we were talking about, when we were flipping through. And then I also mentioned that we would see FF Unit again. Here we have FF Unit Slab. Adele. Probably a lot of us are familiar with that at this point. Freight Micro. So Freight is part of this huge family that's been expanded so much further than Joshua Darden originally designed. But one thing I noted with this was that at the different optical sizes, so we've got text, micro, and big. So this is text book, micro book, and big book. But you can understand what these are supposed to be for. This is for like a display version. This would be a text version. This would be a very small micro version of it. What I noted was that the contrast is at slightly different angles. So like the stress here is horizontal. This one's at a slight angle. This one's completely vertical. I would be really interested to know if that was a purposeful choice for like some sort of is there a tangible benefit to doing that? Is it easier to read small sizes with a horizontal stress? Or is this just kind of playing into if this is going to look more like a D-dome, is that why we're doing the vertical here? Whereas maybe this is more of a transitional and it's going to have, or a humanist and it's going to have the slight angle there. I would be really interested to know how the decision was made on those, but whether you ever know that or not, it's still interesting to recognize those details. And again, I keep repeating this, but that is the point of this book. You will notice these details out in the world, whether that's as a designer or a typographer. These are the things that you'll start to notice after reading this book. Script, that title on top there in red is Tangier by Lipton Letter Design. And the description from Stephen Coles reads, traditionally, a script typeface emulates handwriting, whether its letters are graceful, connected cursive, or the staccato scribbles of a daily shopping list. Besides formal and informal categories, scripts can be sorted by the writing tool, such as a pen or a brush. Script fonts have become increasingly sophisticated in recent years, thanks to technical developments like OpenType. Discretionary ligatures and contextual alternatives yield a more convincing emulation of real handwriting and offer a variety of decorative options. If we turn the page here and we get to Kinescope, I wonder if you have the same visceral reaction to this typeface that I do, because every time I see this typeface by Mark Simonson, I really just have such a reaction to this in such a positive way. I don't know if it's because of my 14 years living in Las Vegas. I don't know if it's from going to garages with my dad when I was a kid. I don't know what it is about this typeface. Maybe it's just Americana, vintage nostalgia. I just, there's something about this typeface that every time I see it, I smile. I feel good. As far as script typefaces go, this is definitely at the top of my list. One thing that's interesting about Studio Slant here by Ken Barber is this mark right here is not an umlaut. This is called a courtesy mark, and that's a new term for me. But it would be useful for German handwriting, a lot of black letter and stuff like that. You'd have these big, bold strokes. This courtesy mark marks that this is a U and this is an N. So you could see without the mark there, you might get a little bit lost there. We've got U-M-E-N. That's really interesting. I've never seen that before, but I can totally understand why it exists. Radio. This typeface here, you can't actually buy anymore. I went to go, do my typical thing, dive down a rabbit hole and find out more about this, this really cool script typeface. It's not for sale. It's retired. You can see the foundry here was Village Constellation. The successor to that foundry was Labor and Weight, but they don't sell it. Magnus here, the designer, Magnus Rackend, hopefully I'm saying that name kind of right. He does have this in his portfolio on his website, but again, it's not for sale. You could probably track it down if you really, really, really wanted it, but just for normal people, commercial purposes, yeah, you can't get this typeface. So that's the first time I've come across that, other than typefaces that were never digitized, but those are the things that you're going to come across when you're diving down those rabbit holes. Tangier, this is the one that we saw on the title card there. Something that I've never heard before, another term that I've come across for the first time are these wing-tipped terminals. I'm not sure if this is the first time that I've seen this design aesthetic, this little tip right here. Stephen is calling this a distinctive wingtip terminal. So I'm not sure if that's the first time I've seen it, but it's definitely the first time that I've heard that term. Again, I tried to turn 2 pages at once and there's only one. These pages are nice and thick. This one here, this came out in 2008 and, we've had technological advances since then. It's been 17 years. But even working with the OpenType features that were available in 2008, this one showcases really what you can do with some of these handwriting scripts if you put in the effort, the work, the font engineering, the design and stuff like that. Just looking at the T's, so T's and E's, you're going to get a lot of repeat, but look at these T's. Completely different. These T's actually have a ligature going through them, completely different. You get to this T, it's kind of short at the baseline. This one's got a ligature to the T going below the baseline. Then you've got another TI ligature here in the opposite direction. You got an E that's swooping up to the top of this T with a tail on it. Like, this is a great example of what's possible by a good designer, good font engineering teams. Just if someone is willing to put in the effort, you could create a very passable handwriting script. Obviously, at some point, you can look at the details forever and you can find repeats, but this is an excellent example of what's possible with current technology, or should I say technology from 17 years ago. Last but not least is display typefaces. I do not have a title card for this one with a description for you because there is no description for display typefaces. It's kind of everything all squished into one, everything that doesn't fit into one of those other nice, neat categories. I'm sure someone has a description or definition for it, but Stephen Coles doesn't give us one, so I'm not going to pull one from somewhere else. I'm pulling everything from this book so you understand exactly what you're getting inside of this book itself. So we're going to see quite a few different things. We've got a monospace typeface here. Ed Interlock, this is another one from House Industries. They do some really, really fun stuff. Kim Barber, great letterer. Obviously, this is based on the lettering from Ed Bengat. And there's just a lot going on here. It says there's over 1,400 ligatures to create this font and get all these interlocking characters and things like that. This is something that you really would typically do lettering, but not all of us have the budget or the skill to do that. And a typeface like this with these types of open type features, again, that have a ton of care put into them, a lot of ligatures, a lot of glyphs, make something like this possible. And the fact that this has the heritage of Ed Bengat, it's a tough one to pass up if you needed a typeface like this. Roomba. I made a note to myself when I saw this one that I really liked the A's, and I'm not sure, again, this is one of those visceral reactions like I had with Kinescope. I don't know what it is about the A's that draw me to it, but it works in all of them. So this one does have optical sizes. This is from Typotones. You've got the Roomba Small, Roomba Large, and Roomba Extra. I really like Roomba Extra here, but they all look very nice. But Roomba Extra has like a real, like a real rhythm to it. Like these letters just feel like they're dancing, bouncing around. Really, really cool. And this is the kind of stuff that's tough to classify. That's why it's a display type. Trade Gothic here. The more I looked at narrow typefaces in this book, the more I really do appreciate them, especially for headlines and things like that. But I really like Trade Gothic here. Another condensed narrow typeface is Heroic Condensed. And I know you're not going to be able to see it on the screen, but these three little lines right here, those are fractions, and they're written like you would write them as a kid, one on top of the other, not like you would use in typography where it's got the slash. So when it comes to a condensed typeface, you want to make it as narrow as possible. I love that they made that design decision there to put them stacked on top of each other. Trade Gothic here, this is a pretty condensed typeface, but they went ahead and did the full, slashed fractions. And if you wanted to put that in a headline, that's going to take up a lot more space than any of these lowercase letters. So I do think when you're looking at typefaces and you're trying to make design decisions, trying to choose a typeface, these are the type of things that you will know exist after reading this book. And these are the type of things that you'll know to look for in these types of use cases. And I apologize that that's not easier to see. Let me see if I can get a focus on it. I'm not sure if it's going to work. Oh, look, you can kind of get it. Okay, there you go. Now I got to recenter the book. Made it all the way through without having to recenter. Okay. But yeah, I really do like that detail. And that's just the kind of little things that you'll notice. I've never been a fan of black letter. Not that I hate black letter or anything, but it's never something that's particularly drawn my attention. But after seeing this one here by Jim Parkinson's, I don't know. I have a different appreciation for it. And it's something that I really would like to explore more. Again, that's one of the seeds, whether I understand anything that's going on here or remember any of the anatomy from a black letter typeface, it's now kind of put that thing into me where I'm like, ooh, I want to learn more about this. And I think that's how you grow in life, whether it's typography or anything, just kind of exposing yourself to stuff and letting these things take you where they might go. This one was described as something that could be used on the glossy pages of a fashion magazine or perfume bottle. It's very light, very airy, very luxurious looking. And last but not least is Marion. Marion actually has a huge collection. If you go look online, the Marion collection by Commercial Type now has 28 styles listed on their website. They even have a monolined black letter font. So if the black letter font by Jim Parkinson's wasn't doing for you, go check out the one in this Marion collection. A bunch of monoline fonts, and they're all really, really cool. And this is another one where like a monoline font can just kind of fall or feel flat. But when it's done well, man, it can feel really, really, really cool. It's a great one to end on because we are finished. This is the index of the book. You're not going to find any terms or anything like that like you see in the glossary. This is basically going to be three things: fonts, foundries, designers. So if you're looking for a specific font that you saw in the book, you can go find that here. If you're looking for a specific designer, you can find that here. And if you're looking for a specific foundry, you can find that here. Great resource for those three things. And then lastly, there is just credits and acknowledgments. He gives a little thank you. And then gives even some further reading. So you finish this, you don't want to wait for my next book review. Go ahead and look at that further reading that Stephen's suggesting there. And that's going to be it. There we go. Back page we already looked at. It's got every typeface listed on the back here. But do I recommend this book? Yes, I said that right from the get-go. I absolutely recommend this book. I wouldn't spend weeks and weeks reading this and kind of like exploring every facet of everything that's in this if I didn't like this typeface, or if I didn't like this book about type. So yes, I do recommend The Anatomy of Type by Stephen Coles. This has been the Jectives flip through book review of The Anatomy of Type by Stephen Coles. And I think it is definitely worth your time to check out. Subscribe if you like these book reviews, and I will see you in the next one.